Hi, I welcome you to this communication. And in this session, I'll be giving you an overview of Module 1. There are four modules that we have in this particular course. I really give you an overview of this module. I would take you through the four modules so that you get an idea in terms of where does this particular module, the first module, really stand vis-a-vis the entire course. Now, this is a course where I'll be interacting with you for over 20 sessions, and then since we're going to talk about communication, and we'll spend a lot of time in practicing. Apart from delivery from my side, I would also expect a lot of participation from your side in terms of when we are practicing things like presentation or oral, many things which are there for us to really learn. Now, communication is a very, very important skill that all managers must have. And one of the things that most of the postgraduate management institutes really emphasize on or expose students like you to is building your communication skills. That's very important. When you come here and make a presentation, or when you communicate with others in a case study kind of a situation, so you need to know how do you really communicate, how do you put your point across. For example, if you're participating in a discussion in a classroom for a particular case, you should be able to make your point of view heard in the discussion that you have. And how do you make a valid point in that kind of scenario? Or when you're making a presentation, in a class presentation, when you're making, what are the things that you should be looking at when you're making a presentation? This particular course would typically take you through the various aspects of communication. So broadly, we are going to focus on oral communication. We're going to focus on written communication. And also, we're going to focus on aspects of communication in a business context. So for example, interpersonal communication, right? Or maybe in case of in a scenario where you have to interact with people from different cultures, so intercultural communication, right? So these are the things that we're going to cover. We'd also look at communication from the perspective of a job seeker. So towards the end of this course, we'll also take a look in terms of how do we prepare our resumes, or how do we really write that letter. Even in the business context, we would also look at how do you write a business letter, how do you break a good news to people, how do you break a bad news to people, how do you structure your email, what should go into an email, and so on. Those are the practical things that we are going to really look at it. How do you prepare a report, and how do you present a report? So before you are making a presentation, what are the things that you should be looking at? So all these practical things are what we are going to cover in this particular course. And I'm going to give you an overview of the first module today. Now, these are the four modules that I talked about. So module 1, which I'm going to discuss today, we're going to talk about introduction to managerial communication. My emphasis will be more in terms of understanding about communication as a process. Now, if I understand the process of communication, how does really communication happen, I would be better prepared to design my communication, to transmit my communication, to get my point across in the sense that I want it to get across, and so on. So this is why we will look at the process. So in the first session, in this session, we're going to talk about this. The first module, all that will be related to the introduction, some of the basic things that we're going to really look at. Then we'll move on to managerial writing. I've already told you what kind of writing. Talk about notes, memos, and maybe minutes of the meeting, letter, email. So written communication is one part that we're going to focus on in module 2. In module 3, we are going to focus on oral and online presentation. Today, it's the age of technology, so you may have to make a lot of online presentation and so on. So how do you really develop the right kinds of skills to be able to effectively communicate through these medium or when you're speaking orally. So this is what we're going to cover in module number 3. And module number 4, we are going to talk about a few things, as I said, interpersonal, so business etiquette. How do you behave in a group when you're talking, when you are participating in a meeting, and so on. So how do you really communicate? Also those aspects that we talked about in terms of resume writing and a cover letter and all those things we're going to cover in module number 4. So before I really go on to explain what we're going to cover in module 1, uh, let us look, why do we need to study a course in communication? All of us uh, have a fair understanding in terms of how good or how bad we are. I mean, again, these terms are very relative. Some of us may feel we're very bad in communication, but actually when somebody else perceives it, they feel that, oh, you're exceptionally good, or you're better than most of the other people. We'll come to some of these theories I'll talk about. There's something called Johari window, where a lot of times what happens is other people may know more about us than we know ourselves. So there's something called a blind spot, right? So we may feel that we lack something, but people may actually feel that, okay, this guy really has, or this person really has a lot of these attributes which we feel we don't have, right? So these are important things. So first, let us try and understand why we need to study this particular subject. Now, this subject is, very relevant from the perspective of employers, right? No, that's only one part of it, right? Communication is something, irrespective whatever career that you choose to pursue, communication is important, right? Communication at different levels. For example, in the initial stages of your life, you will be communicating with people at the front end. So, but as you go up in the hierarchy, your levels of communication, the type of people that you're going to communicate with, are going to be very, very different, right? So the level of maturity is going to be different. They may have more years of experience. Their expectations of you would be very different, and so on. So it's important. So communication skills are very important wherever you are in the hierarchy in the organization, wherever you begin and whatever you do in life. That's why it is important. Second, from the employer's perspective, these are the skills that employers really look for. So number one, in all the surveys, or most of the surveys which has been conducted with employers to find out which is the most important skill that they expect from their employees or the new hirees, they would come up with an answer saying that it's communication skills. Now, why communication skills is because it is communication that a lot of time opens doors for you, right? That is the way how people accept you. And in a business context, a company has to interact with different kinds of people. People within the organizations have to interact with each other. Now, if you do not have the right kind of skills to communicate, a lot of time people may not understand what you want to say, or they may not accept what you say. And in the process, what may happen, you may feel stifled, that people are not really being open to you, and so on. So this is undesirable kind of a situation that you may face if you don't really focus on developing your communication skills. It's not very difficult, let me tell you. Some of us may feel that, oh, at this life stage, it may be very challenging. Yes, it could be challenging, but then as we say that it is a skill, it can be learned, right? Nobody is born with great communication skills. We learn as we go along, depending on the environment that we are brought up in. That may have an influence in how we speak or how you communicate. But this is something which we can learn, right? Some of the best orators in the world had been very poor communicators in the beginning. You talk about Abraham Lincoln, Gettysburg Address, which is so famous. Uh, so Lincoln really started as a very poor communicator in the beginning. Even if you talk about Sir Winston Churchill, he's thought to be one of the best communicators, who won a Nobel Prize at the age of nearing 80, and so on. So these people all learned, over a period of time, they learned how to communicate, and then they suddenly it was not a sudden thing that happens over a period of time. A lot of toil, after toiling for a long time, they became good communicators. So there's something which can be learned, and if you really put in effort, it can be really done. So as I said, communication skills is one of the most important skills that employers really look at people. Now, if you look at the other skills, now, for example, interpersonal and team skills. Now, the moment you're talking about interpersonal skills, communication is an important part of the interpersonal skills, right? Team skills also, team cohesion and team, your ability to gel with a team also depends on your ability to communicate. So, what I'm trying to emphasize is communication probably runs through many other skills that employers really look for. Communication becomes the base on which other skills can be developed. For example, intercultural, international awareness and sensitivity. Intercultural, again, that's a skill. Intercultural communication. If you're, for example, many of you during the course of your career may find employment in other parts of the world. So you have been born and brought up here, but you may possibly end up working in maybe Singapore or in Europe or in North America, South America, wherever, or Africa. So there you're going to work with different kinds of people, different kinds of cultures. So you need to also understand or imbibe those cultural sensitivities, understand the communication in the context of those cultures, how people communicate in those countries, and so on. For example, a very simple thing like greeting. When in India we fold our hands and we say namaste to greet people. There's some people who bow down, some people shake hands, and that's how it really happens. So you need to understand. That's also part of a communication. So non-verbal communication. When you come back, when you talk about some of the business etiquettes, we'll talk about non-verbal communication in greater details. So those also become part of your communication process. So when you're talking about intercultural and international awareness and sensitivity, your communication is subsumed in that particular skill as well. Okay, not so much in terms of data collection, analysis, decision making skills. Okay, may not be, communication may not be important, but then professionalism, if you look at it, or social media skills, again, communication becomes an important part of those skills. So what I'm trying to emphasize is communication skills is very, very important for you to be a successful manager, or you to achieve the level of success that you really desire. So this course would, help you in orienting you towards more managerial communication. I'm sure most of you come from backgrounds where you are fluent in terms of communicating, you're good with your communication, but then we need to put that in the context of business organizations, because business organizations have certain rules and regulations, or certain, not really rules and regulations, could be certain expectations or guidelines to be followed when you are doing something. For example, writing a letter to a customer or a supplier is very different from writing a letter to your friend, right? So what language do you put in there? You cannot put the language that you generally put in when you're writing to a friend. So in the business context, communication has different kinds of meaning. So for example, you are pitching for business for your company. For example, you are part of an advertising agency and you're pitching for an account with a large company. So what all should you really present? And you would be presenting to, say, a room full of 20 people, very senior people from the client organization, and they are evaluating everything that you're saying. So how do you structure your presentation? Now, in that case, what all do you need to include? So those are specific inputs that you may require when you are talking, when we are talking about communication in the business context, and that's what this course is really going to look into, right? And in the first module, what are we going to cover? We're going to look at understanding the communication process and some of the communication myths. So we look at communication as a process. As I said, if I understand the process, I'll be able to build my skills appropriately. And second, we'll also kind of look at some of the myths of communication. For example, some of us may feel, if I speak good English, I'm a good communicator. No, that's not necessarily be the case. I may be very good in English, but when I try to communicate with people, people don't get my meaning, and that's what may happen. So some of the communication myths will try and dispel. We have feelings about communication. This. We'll see whether those myths really hold or not. Then we will look at communication in the current business environment, where we're talking about multicultural environment and people from diverse backgrounds. We work in a diverse environment, and so in that kind of scenario, what are the things that we need to keep in mind when you're talking about developing communication skills? Then we will also cover in terms of what are the different kinds of speeches. With a few bit of oral communication we're going to uh, dwell upon here, uh, or how do you make conversation? In terms of when you are conversing with people, how do you make conversation? How do you open a conversation? Many times you may feel that when you are at a place where there are a lot of people, you find it very difficult to strike a conversation with somebody, right? So one is either you're overawed by that person, right? Or you may feel, where should I begin? So some of the inputs we'll try and give in this particular module in terms of how do you start a conversation, how do you carry a conversation, how you end a conversation, and so on. Few aspects of it, which is little different from the formal business presentation. So this is why we will go and cover it here. So we'll also need to understand speeches. When I'm to deliver a speech, what kind of content? So what are the different kinds of speeches? I'll talk about them subsequent slides. Some important aspect of communication, which are relevant to job seekers, right? I'll come back to some of those questions. We'll try and explore in this particular module. Okay, so communication process. So what we'll try and do is we will try and look at this Shannon-Weaver model is what we're going to look at in terms of the basic communication model: sender, medium, receiver, and so on, encoding, decoding. So typically we will break it down into 8 different steps and try and understand the model. For example, a sender right now, and you are the receiver, and there's a medium through which this message. Now, that's important for us to understand. Now, whatever I'm saying, are you really getting that exact meaning which I'm trying to convey? That no, the whole. If I understand the process, so there could be a problem at my end in terms of my encoding of the message or the message that I am delivering. Am I really able to deliver in a sense where you receive in the same way that I am delivering? So the problem could be at my end, it could be at the medium end, or it could be at your end in terms of your ability to follow what I am saying. So we'll also look at the barriers to communication. The next maybe in the next slide we'll come back to this. What are the barriers which can come in? Right? Why is it that many times what is being communicated is misinterpreted by other people? So where is the fault? Is it the fault with the communicator or the sender, or is it something else? So we'll try and see all those things in this module. So 8-step process is what we're going to look at. Why communication is important for you as an individual and for a business organization. As I talked about situations in which you would require communication from business perspective. As I said, they need to interact with different sets of groups and people, their customers, the government, the suppliers. So communication is an important part of the organization's functioning. Communication in an organizational context, we look at formal communication versus informal communication. Formal, which is defined by the hierarchy of the organization. It could be vertical, up or down. It could be horizontal, or it could be diagonal, and so on. Horizontal means at the same level, people in the same level communicating with each other. Horizontal could be people in different levels communicating with each other, and so on. So we'll look at those formal communication networks, and also informal, which is typically what we call grapevine, right? Grapevine or rumor. There's also a channel which we have a grapevine, where typically in uncertain environment there's another level of communication, or another channel of communication which gets opened, where people talk about certain things which spreads like wildfire among other people. So that's the informal channel. So we'll look at some of those things in a business context. And some of the common myths, as I said, we'll try and dispel. I have just listed here 2 of those myths. One is, of course, speaking talent is important for effective communication. As I said, some of us may feel that we can speak well, so we are good communicators. That need not necessarily be so. It again depends on who are we communicating with. With the best of your ability to speak, sometimes you may find it very difficult to convince your friend or your brother, your sister, or your parents. So it may happen that your ability to speak does not necessarily mean that your ability to communicate is very, very good. And then there could be another myth is, if I say the words, they should understand. So whatever I say, people will understand. No, that's not it. It is. communication is not only about head, also maybe it's about the way there are many non-verbal aspects of uh, comes in. So it's not necessarily that what I say is what you understand. So some of these myths is which we are going to dispel in this particular module. Okay, the next we're going to talk about communication, the current business environment, what are the opportunities and challenges in of communication diverse world. We're developing cultural competencies. So for example, in a many of us are going to work in a multi-cultural environment where there could be people from different genders, different nationalities, different parts of the world, right? So, since we're going to work with them, we need to be very sensitive to their understanding their needs while we are communicating. Some of the things could be contextual differences. How are people, say, the people of the US different from people in India? For example, your sense of timing. When you call up a friend and he says, I'm reaching in 5 minutes or I'm reaching soon. This concept of soon may be very different from for people from different cultures. When it comes to you, the soon may be 20 minutes. For some people, soon maybe 1 minute, the next 1 minute. So again, that's again cultural influence comes in when you are evaluating the sense of timing, right? So all these can come out of social differences and cultural differences. So in a new in the current business environment, which is very diverse, I need to be sensitive to all this, and I need to learn the tricks of communication in this new business environment. Okay. We will also talk about interpersonal communication and conflict. Then we'll talk about something called transactional analysis. We're going to review two books, two very famous books, which is Games People Play by Eric Berne and I'm okay and you are okay. So these are two books which talks about transactional analysis. It talks about our state in which we communicate. Generally, we operate in three ego states. One is parent, adult, and child. So when you're in the parental state, I would communicate to whom I'm really communicating with as somebody down below. As a child, I would probably give more power to the person whom I'm communicating with. So when I'm talking to my boss, maybe he becomes a parent and I am in a child ego state. And then if he's not happy with me, I would probably be apologetic and so on. And then the other is adult ego state. Most of the effective communication happens when it's an adult to adult. So for example, the other person is also in the same ego state and I'm also in the same ego state, adult to adult, or it could be child to child or parent to parent. When the same match between the ego state, communication becomes more effective. So we'll look at those aspects, which is called transactional analysis. And these books will get a better idea in terms of what transactional analysis is all about. We'll also talk about Johari window. Cells and our understanding by people. So what is known and unknown to self and others. Certain aspects others know about us, we don't know about ourselves. There are certain things we know about ourselves, others don't know. There are certain aspects others also know about us and we also know about ourselves. And there are certain things neither others know nor we know about ourselves. So these are the four different kind of quadrants in Johari window, and what are the implications for communication is what we are going to look at. We'll also look at technology and communication in today's world. There's a significant use of technology in communicating. So, for example, right now I'm communicating through a medium which I would not do in a classroom kind of a situation, right? The use of technology for communication. So how do I use technology, mobile communication, or maybe online communication, or interactive online classrooms, and so on. So these aspects we'll try and take a look in terms of how they have impacted the way we communicate. Then, as I said, we'll try and look at understanding some kind of speeches. I've listed down only three. One could be acceptance speech, keynote address, commemoration address, and so on. How are the contents of speech very different? If you are to give a speech in one of these categories, what should how should you really plan for the speech and how should you really deliver is what we are going to look at. Then, as I said, we'll also look at how do you participate in conversations, how do you, an important aspect of, our business life is our need for creating networks, business networks. Now, networks are very important because networks can help you not only getting more business for your existing company, that may also open up many opportunities for you in the future. So that's what networks really do. So how do you create networks? Many of you would have heard of LinkedIn. LinkedIn is nothing but a professional network. Now, how do you kind of extract the best out of LinkedIn? How do you get connected to people that may help you in future in terms of opening up several opportunities for you? Or so this is what we're going to look at, and also we'll look at how do you develop certain vocabularies on job and company, right? So this, in this particular module, this all we're going to cover, and then we'll also look at some of these things which is relevant in a job context for job seekers. For example, we'll try and see how do you introduce yourself to employers, or when in an interview, how do you introduce yourself, or how do you introduce the company, or how do you introduce your country? And so those are some of the things that we'll practically see and practice in this particular module. How to present information during interview process, and how to communicate in a group discussion. Now, these are all important aspects related to your finding desirable placement in a company. So some of these things we will see in this particular module. We'll try and explore them and see how we learn about them. There are other courses, of course, which will prepare you more about certain things like interview techniques or GD techniques. In this course, that's also part of a communication. So if you're participating in a GD, how should you really be communicating, or and so on. So some of the inputs we'll try and give you here. Right. So that brings us to the end of this particular session, where I give you an overview of what we're going to cover in module 1. We'll try and understand, communication as a process, right? Then we'll look at other aspects in terms of, intercultural communication, how communication happens in the current dynamic business environment. What are the different kinds of speeches that you should be aware of, and how do you, as an employment seeking individual, how should you prepare for some of these things like introducing yourself and so on. So some of these things we're going to cover in module 1, and module 2, 3, and 4 onwards we'll talk about written communication, oral communication, and so on. So thank you, and I'll come back and see you again when I give you an overview of module 2.